I'm Leo, 41, divorced for about 3 years now, with shared custody of my 2 kids, Eli, who's 11, and Chloe, who's 8. I work from home as a graphic designer, which means I'm usually in the house most days, except on the days I pick up the kids from school or take them to my ex's place. Money's been tight lately. Divorce wasn't cheap, and raising 2 kids with 1 income is no joke, so I've been cutting corners wherever I can. That's what led me to Craigslist. My son's birthday was coming up, and all he wanted was a PlayStation 5. No way I could afford a new one, but I found a guy online selling a barely used one for half the price. I figured, hey, worth checking out. The seller's name was Travis. Said he lived just 20 minutes from me in a quiet residential neighborhood, and he seemed normal enough over the phone. Friendly even. No weird vibes. I went over there one afternoon, a Thursday, around 3 p.m. I remember because I had a meeting at 1 and planned everything so I'd be back in time to pick up the kids by 5. His house was a 1-story ranch-style home, a little run-down but nothing sketchy. Travis looked to be in his early 30s, scruffy beard, wore a mariner's cap, and had this casual way of talking that made him seem like just another dude trying to make some quick cash. He brought the console out onto the porch, plugged it in to show it worked. Everything seemed legit. I gave him the $300 in cash, and we chatted for a few minutes, mostly small talk. He asked where I was from, what I did for a living, how old my kids were. I answered without thinking twice. I mean, people ask questions, right? It didn't feel intrusive at the time. I even mentioned that I worked from home, that I was usually around, except for the afternoons when I had to pick up my kids. Looking back, I hate how casually I gave him that information. I thanked him, headed back to my car, and didn't think about him again. My son loved the console. He was thrilled. That should have been the end of it. But 4 days later, on a Monday, I came home around 6 p.m. after picking up the kids and getting them dinner, and the front door was slightly ajar. At first I thought maybe I hadn't closed it properly. But then I saw the mess. Drawers pulled out, stuff tossed everywhere. Whoever it was had gone through every room. TV was gone, laptops. My old camera. They even took a box of random coins I kept in the closet. I froze. The kids were still in the car, and I didn't want them to see the place like that, so I backed out and called the cops. I remember standing in the driveway, heart racing, hands shaking, trying to keep my voice steady as I explained what happened. That's when the unease really started settling in. Something about it didn't feel random. The cops showed up maybe 15 minutes later. They were professional, asked all the right questions, took notes, dusted for prints. I gave them access to the security camera footage from the doorbell cam I'd installed last year. I almost forgot I had it until they asked. We pulled up the files on my phone, and that's when my stomach dropped. The guy was wearing a mask. Yeah. But there was something about the way he moved, the way he walked up to the house, like he already knew where everything was. He didn't hesitate. He went straight for the back gate, came in through the kitchen window, and started unplugging electronics like he'd done it before. And worse, he wasn't alone. There was another guy with him. Taller, bulkier, wearing all black, no hesitation either. This wasn't some junkie breaking in for quick cash. It was planned. The detective asked if anyone new had been by the house recently, anyone I'd told about my schedule, or who might know when I'd be gone. That's when it hit me like a punch to the chest. Travis, the guy from Craigslist. I told them about him, about how I went to his place, how he asked questions that at the time felt like normal conversation. But now, it felt like a setup. They asked if I had his contact info, and I did. I still had the Craigslist messages and his phone number. Turns out the number was already disconnected. His listing was gone too. It was like he vanished overnight. We kept reviewing the camera footage, hoping for a better shot of the car, or maybe the second guy's face. But then we noticed something else. It wasn't the first time he'd been there. He'd come back 3 times before the break-in, once on Friday afternoon, again Saturday night, and once more early Sunday morning, just standing outside my house. Sometimes he walked up to the windows and just stood there like he was watching me. He even looked straight into the camera once, but he was wearing a hoodie, pulled low, and the lighting didn't catch his face. That part messed me up. The idea that someone had been lurking around my house for days, watching me while I was inside with my kids. I didn't sleep that night. I don't think I blinked. The police said they'd keep me posted, but I could tell by their tone that they didn't expect much. No prints, no ID on the guy. And honestly, Craigslist scams aren't new to them. I installed new locks the next day, upgraded the cameras, even bought motion lights for the backyard. But nothing really made me feel safer. Every sound at night made me jump. I started sleeping with a baseball bat next to the bed. My kids noticed. Eli started asking why the lights were always on in the hallway, why I was checking the windows 5 times before bed. I just told him I was being extra careful. What else could I say? A guy I bought your birthday present from might come back and hurt us. I couldn't do that to him. By the end of that week, I had completely stopped leaving the house unless it was absolutely necessary. I started doing all the grocery shopping online, kept the kids with me during my custody days instead of going out. Even my ex noticed something was off. She asked me if something happened, but I just said I'd had a break-in, nothing serious. I didn't want to drag her or the kids into it any more than they already were. But inside, I was a mess. Every time I passed by a window, I checked the reflection. Every time I walked down the hall, I felt like someone was watching. There was this pressure in the air I couldn't explain, like my own house had turned into a trap, and I was the one stuck inside. 2 weeks later, something strange happened. I was up late working on a freelance project, headphones on, when I caught movement on the security feed out of the corner of my eye. Someone was standing at the edge of the driveway. Just standing there. Not moving. No car. No noise. Just a silhouette. I froze, barely breathing. Then, slowly, the figure turned and walked back into the dark. I didn't sleep at all that night. I went through all the footage the next day, rewinding every second. But the cameras didn't catch a face. Just the same height and build as Travis. It had to be him. I knew it. He hadn't given up yet. That's when I decided to do something I probably should have done sooner. I posted about it online. Reddit, actually. I found a local thread for scams and break-ins, explained everything that happened, described Travis, the car he might have used, even posted a still from the video footage. It blew up more than I expected. And in the comments, someone said they'd seen a guy matching that exact description a few towns over, pulling the same Craigslist scam. Console sales. Asking weird questions. Another guy said he'd let the guy into his house to test a device, and later noticed things missing. Suddenly, it wasn't just about me anymore. This guy had a pattern. A week after that post, I got a message from someone claiming to be a friend of one of the victims. Said they reported it to the police and that a small task force was starting to piece things together. I don't know if it was my post that did it or if they were already onto him, but a couple of weeks later, I got a call from the detective who first handled my case. They'd arrested someone matching Travis's description at a gas station in Oregon. He was using a fake ID, had stolen electronics in the trunk, and a burner phone filled with messages about meeting people through Craigslist. I don't know if he'll do serious time or if his accomplice was caught too. But after that call, I finally slept through the night for the first time in over a month. I'm not really the type of person who shares personal stuff online, especially not stuff like this. But it's been a few weeks now, and I still can't sleep through the night. I keep replaying every second in my head, wondering what would have happened if I'd gotten home 10 minutes earlier. My name's Grace. I'm 34. I live alone in a quiet suburb in Maryland, and I work as a librarian at the local branch. My life is pretty routine. Work, grocery runs, tea before bed, repeat. I've always liked the predictability of it. It makes me feel safe, or at least it used to. What happened that night cracked something inside me I don't think I'll ever fully put back. It was a Tuesday, late October. I remember because the air had that crisp smell that only happens when the leaves start drying out. I'd stayed at work a little longer than usual, reorganizing a shelf in the back that had been bothering me all week. I hadn't planned to, but once I started, I didn't want to leave it half-finished. It was already dark when I finally left. I stopped by the pharmacy for a prescription, grabbed some soup and crackers from a small market down the block, and headed home. I don't live far, just a 15-minute drive. The whole time I wasn't thinking about anything besides taking a hot shower and curling up with a book. There was nothing unusual, until I pulled into my driveway. When I got to my front door, I noticed the lock turned just like I'd left it. But when I tried to open it, the door only gave a few inches before something tugged it back. The chain lock. I never used that thing. I remember actually saying out loud, "What the hell?" I stood there staring at it, my mind trying to make it make sense. Maybe I had started using it and forgot. No, I was sure. I don't even like the chain because it rattles in the wind. For a second, I laughed nervously, thinking maybe I was just overtired or being dramatic. Then something inside me shifted. That deep, cold drop in the stomach like your body knows before your brain catches up. I stepped back, phone in hand, and called my friend Lauren. I had her on speaker as I walked slowly around the side of the house. She was mid-sentence, telling me to stay calm when I saw it. A shadow, moving inside. It passed right through the kitchen, behind the frosted glass of the back door. My breath caught. I just stood there frozen, watching as the figure disappeared behind the wall. I whispered Lauren's name, but my voice cracked. She was shouting now, telling me to get in my car, to call the cops. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely dial 911. I ran to my car, locked the doors, and kept my eyes on the house as I told the dispatcher what I saw. I couldn't stop whispering, like somehow I thought he'd hear me from inside. The scariest part, the lights were off. Whoever was in there didn't want to be seen. The police showed up surprisingly fast, less than 10 minutes, but it felt like an hour. 2 cruisers, lights off, quiet. I stayed on the line with the dispatcher the whole time, crouched in the front seat of my car, engine off, heart pounding like it was trying to escape my chest. One officer tapped on my window, made me unlock the door, and quietly asked me what I saw. I told him about the chain, the shadow, everything. He nodded, then signaled to his partner, and they both approached the house. Guns drawn. It was like watching a movie through a screen of complete disbelief. That's my house. I live there. They knocked once, twice. Nothing. Then they used a tool to cut the chain and push the door open. I couldn't see anything from where I was, but I kept watching for movement, hoping they'd come back out quickly and tell me it was just a misunderstanding. But they didn't. Minutes passed. Then finally I saw one of the officers reappear, walking briskly toward his cruiser while speaking into his radio. The other came out a moment later, guiding a man in handcuffs. That's when my stomach completely dropped. He wasn't yelling or fighting. He wasn't some wild-eyed stranger. He looked normal. Jeans, dark hoodie, short brown hair, maybe mid-30s. He didn't look at me, just stared down at the ground like he'd gotten caught sneaking out of a movie theater, not breaking into someone's home. The officer who had spoken to me earlier came back and told me they found him hiding in my pantry, that little narrow space with a folding door, barely wide enough for me to reach the top shelf. He said the man hadn't said a word since they found him. No ID, no explanation. Nothing. But the back door showed no signs of forced entry. That meant he had gotten in while I was already home, probably while I ran out for errands before dinner. My blood ran cold. I remembered I'd left the side door unlocked for like 30 minutes. I never thought twice about it. I live in a quiet neighborhood, right? Everyone knows each other. The officer said he likely slipped in then and chained the door from the inside so no one else could come in. He was waiting for me. That was the moment everything clicked, and I felt sick. He wasn't there to rob me. He hadn't touched anything, hadn't taken a single item. He was there to wait. That was the plan. To hide until I came back, maybe until I went to sleep. Or maybe he was going to jump me the second I closed the front door. I couldn't stop shaking. The officer tried to be calm, said they'd take him in and run his prints. I asked him point blank, "What do people like that usually want?" And he just looked at me and said, "That's what we're trying to figure out." But I could tell from his face he had a pretty good idea, and it wasn't anything I wanted to hear. I didn't go back inside that night. I couldn't. Lauren came to pick me up and I stayed at her place for almost a week. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that shadow moving through my kitchen, quiet and deliberate. I kept imagining him crouched in that pantry, listening to every sound I made when I got home, waiting for the right moment. I couldn't stop wondering how long he'd been watching me, if he'd been in the house before, if he knew my routines. I had this horrible thought that he might have even been in the library at some point, watching me from a distance, figuring out where I lived, how I moved through the day. The idea made my skin crawl. A few days later, the detective assigned to the case called me. The man they arrested didn't have a criminal record, at least not one that showed up in national databases. He wasn't talking, not even giving them a name. They had taken his fingerprints, sent them around, but there were no hits. It was like he didn't exist. No ID on him, no wallet, nothing in his pockets except a folded piece of paper with my address written on it. That was it. The detective told me, very matter of fact, he planned this. I asked if they thought he had followed me before. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "We think this wasn't the first time he'd been in your house." That one sentence has haunted me more than anything else. Every creak I ever heard, every misplaced item I brushed off, every time I thought I'd left a door cracked open by accident. What if it was him? Just testing the waters. Since then, I've changed the locks, installed cameras, got a full security system with motion detectors. I double and triple check every window before I go to bed. But that feeling, that violation, it doesn't go away. Home doesn't feel like home anymore. It feels like a place that betrayed me. A place I used to feel safe, that now feels like it was always waiting to turn on me. He's still in custody. They're charging him with breaking and entering and attempted assault. But without more evidence or a confession, the case is a mess. I check the news every day to make sure he's still behind bars. I don't know if I'll ever get real answers. I don't even know if I want them anymore. All I know is, if I had gotten home even a few minutes earlier, I wouldn't be here writing this right now. And if you ever get home and see a chain lock you swear you didn't latch, don't open the door. Don't try to be brave. Trust your gut. Because mine was screaming, and I'm so glad, for once, I actually listened. I'm not the type of guy who normally posts stuff like this online, but what happened to me last fall still messes with my head almost every night. My name's Tomas. I'm 50 now, and I've worked in real estate for over 2 decades. I mostly deal with investment properties: buy, renovate, lease, or flip. It's not glamorous, but it's kept food on the table and let me semi-retire early. Back in October, I was handling 3 vacant houses at once, which meant I was juggling contractors, insurance calls, and the occasional buyer who wanted to take a quick look before making an offer. That was normal. What wasn't normal was agreeing to meet a guy after dark, alone, at a property that wasn't even in a good part of town. It was a Wednesday, close to 7:30 p.m. I had just finished dinner and was watching a basketball game when I got the message through one of the listing platforms. The guy said his name was Darren. He claimed he was flying back out to Dallas early the next morning and really wanted to see the house on Forsyth Avenue before he left. He seemed polite, professional, a little pushy maybe, but nothing that raised red flags at first. I hesitated. Something about the timing felt off. But I caved because he said he was a cash buyer and didn't want to miss out. In this market, that kind of buyer's gold. I grabbed my keys, threw on a jacket, and headed out. The house itself was a 1920s colonial I had picked up at an auction a few months earlier. It had charm, but it needed work. Still didn't have proper electricity in half the rooms. I pulled up around 7:55 just before sunset. The porch light was out, which wasn't surprising, but what was surprising was the front door being slightly open. I remember freezing for a second in my truck, staring at that door like maybe I was seeing it wrong. But I told myself maybe Darren had just arrived early and a contractor had forgotten to lock up properly. I got out, locked my truck, and walked up the creaking steps. The first thing I noticed when I stepped inside was how dark it was. Not dim, pitch black. I tried flipping the switch by the door, but nothing. Then I heard a voice from deeper in the house, calm and casual. "Hey, Tomas, back here." It didn't echo like you'd expect in an empty house. It was quiet, almost too quiet. I moved cautiously toward the hallway, using my phone's flashlight. That's when I saw him, standing at the far end just past the kitchen doorway. He wasn't holding a brochure or looking at the floors. He was standing dead still, hands in his coat pockets, like he'd been waiting there a long time. Something in my gut dropped. I started to say something, can't even remember what, but I barely got a word out before everything went sideways. He stepped forward, and that's when I saw the gun. It wasn't pointed at me yet, but it was visible enough to shut me up fast. "On the ground," he said, just like that, like it wasn't the first time he'd said it. I backed up instinctively, but he raised the gun just a little and repeated it, slower. I dropped to my knees. The hardwood was cold and smelled faintly of mildew and something else. Something metallic. I remember thinking that the last time I had walked through this hallway, I had been calculating renovation costs, not lying face down praying I wasn't about to die. He came up behind me and pressed the barrel lightly to the back of my neck. "Wallet, phone, keys," he said. My hands were shaking so bad I nearly dropped everything as I fumbled them out. He asked me if I had any weapons. I told him no. Then he asked me something I wasn't expecting. "How many other properties do you manage around here?" I didn't answer right away, and he kicked my leg. "Don't make me ask again." That's when I knew this wasn't random. This guy hadn't just picked me out of nowhere. He had been watching me. I told him I had 3 vacant houses, gave him the addresses. He made me list the alarm codes, told me to speak slowly. He didn't yell, didn't seem panicked. That was maybe the scariest part. He wasn't nervous. He was calm, like he'd done this before and knew exactly how long he had. He kept saying, "You cooperate, you live. That's it." He took my phone and told me to unlock it. Then he asked me to show him pictures of the interiors of the other houses. I had tons on my camera roll, photos for listings, before and afters. He looked through them in silence, nodding once or twice. Then he asked if any of them had cameras installed. I lied and said yes. I didn't know if it would help or make things worse. He stared at me for a long moment, then said, "We'll see." After that, he told me to crawl into the coat closet by the front door and shut the door behind me. "Stay quiet for 10 minutes. If I hear anything before then, I come back." I did exactly what he said. I heard the front door creak open, footsteps on the porch, and then silence. I stayed in that closet for 20 minutes, easy, My legs were cramping, and my hands were still shaking so hard I could barely keep a grip on the door handle. When I finally came out, the house was empty. My truck was still out front, untouched. The guy didn't want my vehicle. He wanted access, information. It hit me then how carefully planned it all was. He'd used a fake name, obviously, and contacted me through one of those real estate platforms that lets buyers message sellers anonymously. He knew my schedule, my listings, probably even the times I preferred to do walkthroughs. I drove home in silence, heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out behind the wheel. That night I barely slept. I kept replaying everything in my head. The way he spoke, how sure of himself he was, like I was just one stop on a longer route. First thing in the morning, I went straight to the police. I gave them everything, the addresses, the alarm codes I had given up, even the listing platform messages. They took my statement, filed a report, but I could tell right away they didn't expect to catch him. "These guys usually hit fast and move on," one officer told me. "You're lucky he just wanted access." I didn't feel lucky. I felt exposed, violated, like my whole world had been mapped out and used against me. I spent the next 48 hours changing every lock I had keys for, canceled the alarm codes, removed listings, contacted contractors and told them to stay away from the vacant houses until further notice. I even hired a private security firm to sweep the other properties just in case. One of the houses, the one on Lexington, had signs someone had been inside. Muddy prints in the entryway, a cigarette butt near the back door. Nothing stolen, nothing broken, just a silent reminder. I was here. That shook me more than anything else. He hadn't needed to steal anything. He got what he wanted: access, knowledge, control. Weeks passed. I didn't hear anything else, and no one ever got caught. The messages from Darren disappeared off the platform like they were never there. And I realized something else that chilled me. He didn't just choose a house. He chose me. He had probably watched for months, learning which investors handled their own showings, who moved around alone, who didn't ask for ID. I fit the profile. I was predictable. That's what scared me most. I wasn't just unlucky. I was targeted. I've changed how I work now. I never go to a showing alone. I don't meet anyone after dark. Every property has cameras, alarms, smart locks, even panic buttons. Some people think I overreacted, but they weren't there. They didn't feel that gun on the back of their neck. They didn't have to crawl into a closet and hope someone wouldn't change their mind. I still do real estate, but I carry now. I take precautions I never thought I'd need. And every time I step into a vacant house, I stop for just a second and listen. For footsteps, for silence, for anything that feels off. Because now I know what it feels like when something's not right. And once you've felt that, you never forget it. I'm not really the type to post on forums like this, but after what happened, I've been carrying this weird weight in my chest, like if I don't tell someone, it's gonna rot inside me. My name's Elise. I'm a 32-year-old single mom, and back in the fall of 2021, I was renting a small house at the edge of a town in northern Illinois called Sheffield. It was nothing fancy, just a one-story home with faded blue siding and a yard that sloped into a line of trees out back. I moved there with my two kids, Maddie and Levi, after leaving my ex. I needed somewhere quiet, affordable, and far from the mess I just walked out of. The house seemed perfect at first. Too perfect, maybe. That particular week started off normal. I was working from home, juggling remote freelance projects while managing the kids' school routines. Most of my evenings were filled with dinner plates, laundry, and Maddie's never-ending questions about dinosaurs. But sometime midweek, I noticed something off. When I took the trash out, I saw a set of muddy footprints near the back gate. At first I thought maybe it was the kids playing, but the prints were too big and too far from where they usually run around. I tried brushing it off. Maybe the landlord had stopped by and forgotten to mention it. But then I saw the trash can had been dragged just slightly out of place. It wasn't where I always left it. I remember freezing for a second, staring at it like it would move again. That night, after the kids were in bed, I was brushing my teeth when I noticed the porch light wasn't on. I could have sworn I left it on like I always do. It was part of my little routine, like locking the doors and double-checking the baby monitor. When I stepped outside to check, I saw the bulb had been twisted loose. Not broken, not burned out, just unscrewed enough not to turn on. That's when I got this sick feeling deep in my gut, like someone wanted the outside of my house dark. I screwed it back in, turned on the light, and stood there for a long moment scanning the tree line, but everything was dead quiet. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want to scare the kids or seem paranoid. And honestly, part of me thought maybe I was overthinking it. But 2 nights later, I woke up around 2:30 a.m. to this soft, rhythmic tapping. It was so gentle at first I thought I was dreaming, like rain or branches swaying. But when I opened my eyes, the room was dead silent, except for that sound. Tap, tap, tap. Coming from the bedroom window right behind my headboard. My whole body went cold. I sat up, heart pounding so loud I couldn't hear anything else. I wanted to believe it was a stupid prank, maybe some teenager messing around. But who does that in near-freezing weather, in the middle of nowhere? I didn't look out the window. I couldn't. I just sat there, frozen, clutching the comforter up to my chin like that was going to do anything. The tapping stopped after maybe a minute, maybe less, but it felt like an hour. I waited, holding my breath, listening for footsteps, for a car engine, for anything. But there was just this crushing silence, like the air itself had stopped moving. Eventually, I reached over, grabbed my phone, and checked the security app for the cheap door camera I'd installed a month before. Nothing. No movement, no alert. But the camera didn't face the side of the house, just the front porch. The next morning, I walked around the house while the kids were still asleep. There were faint smudges on the glass, right where I thought the tapping had come from. Not fingerprints exactly, more like someone had leaned forward and breathed on the window just barely. That was the first time I felt real fear. Not the passing unease I'd had with the trash can or the porch light, but full-body, nauseating fear. I called my friend Natalie, asked if she could bring over some of those window alarms she used in her apartment. She brought them that same afternoon and stayed for a bit, helped me install them. She joked about how paranoid I was getting. I laughed with her, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I started sleeping with the baby monitor volume turned all the way up and a flashlight next to my bed. For a few days, nothing happened. No sounds, no weird shifts in the trash can, and the porch light stayed on like it was supposed to. I began to feel like maybe that one night had just been someone passing through, or maybe some animal had brushed against the glass. But the thing is, fear like that doesn't really go away. It just settles deeper, like a seed you can't dig out. I found myself checking the locks 3 or 4 times a night, walking the hall in the dark just to make sure the kids' doors were shut, that their windows were locked. I even moved Maddie's bed further from her window without telling her why. Then came the night everything escalated. It was a Saturday, just after midnight, and I'd fallen asleep on the couch watching some awful reality show rerun. I woke up suddenly, not because of a noise, but because of this feeling, like pressure on my chest or a change in the air. The living room was pitch dark. I reached for my phone to check the time, and that's when I noticed it. The hallway light was on. I hadn't left it on. I never leave it on because it shines directly into the kids' room and wakes Maddie up. I sat there, heart thudding in my ears, staring down the hallway. And then I saw the shadow. Someone was standing just inside the hallway entrance, not moving. not saying a word. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. The figure wasn't huge, but it had this stillness to it that was wrong. Like they were used to standing in the dark, like it wasn't new to them. My phone was still in my hand, but I didn't dare unlock it. I was afraid the screen light would give me away. For a few seconds I thought maybe I was still dreaming. But then the person shifted, ever so slightly. Their head tilted toward me, just a fraction, like they were listening. That tiny motion snapped me out of whatever frozen state I was in. I launched off the couch and screamed, loud and raw. The kind of scream that doesn't sound human when it comes out. I bolted straight for the kids' room and slammed the door behind me. Maddie sat up instantly, eyes wide, already crying, and Levi started wailing in his crib. I dragged the dresser in front of the door without thinking. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the handles. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 with one hand while trying to hush the kids with the other. I whispered to the dispatcher, told them someone was inside the house. I remember saying that over and over. He's inside, he's inside, he's inside. The operator told me to stay calm, stay hidden, and that officers were already on the way. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't hear a door slam. Nothing. Just that same crushing silence, like the house itself had gone hollow. The officers got there fast, under 10 minutes I think, but it felt like a lifetime. They found the front door unlocked, which I swear on my life I had locked. They didn't find anyone inside, but there were muddy prints in the hallway, leading from the back door to the living room. Prints that didn't match mine. That back door had a flimsy old lock, one of those turnstile knobs that you could probably pop open with a screwdriver if you knew what you were doing. There was no sign of forced entry, just that it had been used. After that night, I didn't stay in that house another second. Natalie helped me pack up what I needed the next morning, and I stayed at her place with the kids for a few weeks until I found something else. I filed a report, gave the police every detail I could remember, but nothing ever came of it. No arrest, no leads, just a case number. I got a message from the landlord a month later saying he was changing all the locks and installing security cameras. That was the last I ever heard about it. I still don't know who that person was or how long they'd been watching us, but I think about the unscrewed porch light, the footprints, the tapping. All of it feels like a build-up to that one night, like they were testing me, studying how long it would take before they made their move. What scares me most is how quiet it was. How calm they were. No rush, no panic, just patient, like they'd done this before. I'm sharing this now because I still don't sleep right. I still wake up at 2:30 a.m. sometimes, just listening. And I still check every light bulb, every lock, every window. Not because I think it'll stop someone like that, but because now I know they're real. And they don't need to break in loud. Sometimes they're already inside. I'm not the kind of guy who usually shares stuff online, but after what happened a few months ago, I've been carrying this heavy feeling like I need to get it out somehow. I'm 38, live in a quiet suburb in Connecticut, with my wife and our 2 kids. Noah's 11, and Katie just turned 8. Back in November, I had taken a few weeks off from work to help out more at home. Katie had the flu, and my wife Megan was buried in end-of-year work stress, so I figured I'd hold down the fort for a bit. It was one of those crisp fall afternoons where the light hits just right and the air smells like leaves and distant fireplaces. Everything felt calm, normal. That's what gets to me most looking back. How normal everything felt just before it happened. Around 5:30 p.m., Megan had taken Noah to soccer practice, and I was home alone with Katie, who had finally knocked out for a nap on the couch. I remember I was heating up leftover lasagna and flipping through channels when the doorbell rang. Nothing unusual, I assumed it was a package drop-off or maybe one of the neighborhood kids selling something for school. When I opened the door, there was this guy standing there in a red and black jacket with a thermal food bag in one hand and a phone in the other. He looked early 30s, maybe Puerto Rican or Dominican, with a wide smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I remember thinking he had really neat facial hair, like too neat, almost painted on. He greeted me with this cheerful tone like, "Delivery for Mark?" I froze for half a second. "I'm Mark, yeah, but I hadn't ordered anything." I told him that, politely, and he double-checked the phone screen and said, "Weird, this is definitely the address." He even turned the phone around to show me, but the screen was too dim, and I couldn't make anything out. Still, he didn't seem threatening, just confused, maybe tired. He didn't move toward the door or act pushy, so I stayed relaxed, just figured it was a mix-up. I was about to suggest he double-check the street number when I heard something behind him, just the faintest sound of shoes scraping on the pavement. That's when I noticed the second guy. He came from the side, walking up the driveway like he belonged there. He was taller than the first one, heavy-set, white, maybe mid-40s, with this short buzz cut and a delivery uniform that didn't quite fit, like the sleeves were too short for his arms. No food bag, no phone, no smile. Just walked up behind the first guy and stood there looking at me like he was waiting for something. Something shifted in my chest right then. Some gut instinct that whispered, "Close the door." But I hesitated. Just long enough. I asked again, this time a little firmer, "Are you sure you've got the right house?" The first guy chuckled awkwardly and said something like, "Yeah, man, people order stuff and forget all the time. Happens every night." But his eyes kept darting toward the inside of the house, over my shoulder like he was checking to see if anyone else was around. That's when I realized the food bag he was holding was suspiciously light. Like, too light. I've carried enough takeout in my life to know when a bag's empty. And then, for the first time, I noticed something else. The logo on his jacket wasn't any brand I recognized. It looked off, like a fake name made to look real if you didn't pay too much attention. Before I could react, the bigger guy behind him took a step closer and said, low and flat, "Look, man, just let us in. It'll be easier that way." No more delivery guy act, no more smile. Just that sentence, and I felt my throat tighten. I tried slamming the door shut, but they were too fast. The tall one jammed his foot into the gap and shoved forward with this practiced force that knocked me back onto the tile. I barely caught myself before hitting the ground, and all I could think was Katie. I scrambled to my feet and shouted her name as loud as I could, hoping it'd buy me a second, any kind of delay. The first guy came in fast, grabbed me by the collar, and shoved me against the wall with way more strength than I expected. I kicked at him, but he held me there like it was nothing. I could hear the other one walking through the house, heavy boots on hardwood, moving toward the living room. I was yelling at them, saying, "Take whatever you want, just don't hurt my kid," trying to make noise in case a neighbor heard. Anything. But the first guy didn't say a word. He just kept his hand pressed hard against my chest, watching me like he was waiting for me to try something stupid. And then I heard it. Katie's tiny voice calling, "Daddy?" from the living room. That sound ripped through me. I lost it. I slammed my elbow into the guy's arm, hard enough that he flinched, and I broke free for half a second. Just long enough to bolt into the living room and find the big guy standing there, looking down at Katie. She was still on the couch, groggy, confused. He hadn't touched her, yet. I put myself between them and told him, as steady as I could manage, "Get out. Get the fuck out of my house." He just looked at me with this weird, quiet expression. Like he wasn't surprised or angry, just waiting. Like this moment wasn't new to him. I could see something shift in his face when I said that. Like he hadn't decided yet whether to escalate or walk away. Meanwhile, the other guy had come back into the room and closed the front door behind him. Now they were both inside, both looking at me like they were about to deliver some kind of message, not rob the place. "We don't want your money," the taller one said calmly. "We're just here for a conversation." The way he said it, flat, emotionless, made my stomach twist. What kind of conversation starts with breaking into someone's house? I reached behind me slowly, trying to block Katie from view, keeping myself between her and them like a shield. They didn't move. They just stood there like they were expecting me to ask a question or give them some kind of permission. I tried to keep them talking, anything to stall. I asked, "What do you want?" My voice was shaking by then. The smaller guy looked at the taller one and then said, "It's not about you. It's about the house." That made no sense. We've lived here for 6 years. Nothing weird, nothing unusual. Normal 2-story place, small backyard, beige siding, same as every other house on the block. But they kept saying it like it mattered. "Something was done here," the taller one added. "We're just here to make sure it's settled." I was seconds away from losing it. My daughter was behind me, confused and scared, and these two were playing cryptic like it was some kind of game. I told them again to leave, said I was calling the cops. That's when the smaller one stepped forward and reached into his jacket. My heart stopped. I thought it was a weapon. But instead, he pulled out this crumpled, stained photograph. It looked old, sepia tone, creased down the middle. He held it out like he expected me to recognize it. It showed a little boy sitting on what looked like our front porch. But it wasn't our porch. Not exactly. It was this house, yeah, but older. Different numbers above the door. Same shape, same layout. But like it was from decades ago. I didn't take the photo. I just stared at it. The boy in the picture wasn't anyone I knew, but something about his eyes made my skin crawl. They looked hollow, lifeless. The taller guy finally spoke again. "This place doesn't forget," he said. "And it doesn't forgive." And then like that, they turned and walked out. No rush, no threat. Just left the photo on the floor by the door and disappeared into the street like they'd never been here. I locked the door, checked every room in the house, and held Katie for what felt like hours until Megan came home. I told her everything, called the cops, filed a report, but they never found them. I'm not the kind of person who scares easily. I'm 45. I run a small daycare out of my home in a quiet suburb just outside of Charleston, South Carolina. Kids have been my world for over 2 decades, and that comes with a certain type of resilience, you know? Screaming toddlers, surprise fire drills, mystery messes. Nothing really rattled me. My days were structured, loud, and full of joy. At that time, I lived alone in a 2-story colonial-style house with white shutters and a blue door that my niece painted one summer. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was home. The daycare was on the 1st floor, and I kept the 2nd floor strictly for myself. That Tuesday started like any other. I had just finished cleaning up after lunch, the kids had been picked up, and I was enjoying the first moment of real quiet all day when someone knocked on the door. I remember he looked completely ordinary. Late 30s, maybe early 40s, light brown hair under a navy baseball cap, beige vest with the Palmetto Energy logo on it. Nothing about him screamed danger. He even smiled in that polite, apologetic way that people do when they know they're bothering you. He said there'd been an outage reported nearby, and they were checking circuit breakers house by house to locate a possible source. I wasn't expecting anyone, but I didn't think much of it. He didn't ask to come in right away, just pointed toward the side of the house and asked where my breaker was. I told him it was inside, past the kitchen. He nodded like that made perfect sense and asked if he could take a quick look, said it would only take a minute. I hesitated for maybe 2 seconds, but he looked legit. The vest, the logo, even a clipboard in his hand. so I stepped aside and let him in. As he walked toward the kitchen, I instinctively moved to follow him, offering a glass of water out of habit. We stood near the sink, and I pointed to the door beside the pantry that led to the laundry room, where the breaker panel was. He kept his tone light, conversational, asking me how long I'd lived in the area, whether I'd experienced any flickering lights. I was only half paying attention, honestly. I remember glancing at his shoes, dusty work boots, and thinking, I hope he doesn't track mud on the rug. Nothing felt off yet. But what I didn't realize at the time, what still makes my stomach twist, is that I left the side door unlocked. I always did during daycare hours so parents could use the gate on the side yard. That simple habit nearly cost me everything. It wasn't until I heard something upstairs, like a dull thud followed by the sound of a drawer sliding open, that the air in my lungs seemed to stop. My body froze. It wasn't the kind of noise that comes from a house settling or a wind gust hitting a window. It was deliberate, heavy. I turned to the man still standing calmly in my kitchen. He was looking at the breaker box like nothing in the world was wrong, but I swear to you, I saw his jaw tighten. His eyes flicked toward the hallway for just a split second, and that's when I knew. That sound hadn't surprised him. He was waiting for it. I tried to stay calm. I didn't want to believe what I was thinking, but my brain was already racing. I forced a smile and said, "Actually, I just remembered I've got someone upstairs resting. I should check on them real quick." His eyes met mine, and for a second, something shifted. The friendliness disappeared just long enough for me to catch it. Then he smiled again, wider this time, and stepped back like he was giving me space. I walked toward the stairs with my heart pounding so loud it was in my ears. I didn't run. I didn't shout. I just climbed one step at a time, trying not to make a sound. I reached the top and paused. The hallway was quiet, but the bedroom door at the end was open. I always kept it shut. I crept toward the doorway and peeked inside. The room was a mess. Drawers halfway open, my jewelry box turned upside down on the floor, and standing near my closet was a man I had never seen before. He was younger than the one downstairs, maybe late 20s, with buzzed hair and a long scar running down the side of his neck. He didn't even flinch when he saw me. He just stared like I'd interrupted something mildly annoying. My phone was downstairs. I remember that realization hitting me like a slap. The only thing I had on me was the house key still in my hoodie pocket. My first thought was to run back down, but I didn't know where the first guy was at that point. For all I knew, he was blocking the door. I backed away slowly, careful not to turn my back to the guy in the room. My mind kept repeating, "Get out, get out, get out." But when I got to the top of the stairs, he moved fast. I heard his boots on the floor behind me, and I bolted down those steps, yelling as loud as I could. I didn't care what I sounded like, I just screamed, "Get out of my house!" over and over, hoping maybe a neighbor would hear. I could see the front door. I was maybe 6 steps away when the man from the kitchen appeared in front of it. His hands were out, like he was trying to calm me, but his face had dropped all pretense. No smile, no softness. Just something cold and unreadable. I skidded to a stop, turned, and ran through the kitchen toward the laundry room instead. The side door. I don't know how I managed to remember it was still unlocked in the middle of all that chaos, but I did. I flung it open and ran straight into the backyard. There was no one around. The neighbor's yard was empty, their windows dark. I didn't stop running until I hit the side gate and made it to the street. I ran straight to the corner gas station, barefoot, holding my breath the whole way, convinced they were right behind me. When I burst through the door, panting and shouting that someone was in my house, the cashier, an older guy named Rick who knew me from daycare drop-offs, called 911 without asking a single question. I stood there, shaking, trying to explain what had just happened like any of it made sense, but I knew they were gone already. By the time the cops got to my place, the house was empty. No sign of forced entry, no fingerprints, nothing. Just the mess upstairs and a lingering smell of cheap cologne. I told them everything I could. Descriptions, the fake vest, the company name. They took it seriously, thankfully. One of the officers, a younger woman named Perez, told me there had been similar reports popping up across the city. Same story. A guy posing as a utility worker to get inside, then someone else slipping in through an unlocked door. They were targeting older folks mostly, anyone who seemed distracted or alone during the day. I wasn't the first. I probably wouldn't be the last. They called it a distraction scam. But that word, scam, feels way too soft for what that was. It was a home invasion. It was calculated. They didn't just want to rob me, they watched me. They knew my routine, knew I worked with kids, probably knew the exact time I'd be alone. That's the part that still haunts me. The idea that they'd been watching from somewhere, waiting for the right window. I changed all my locks the next day. Installed a camera at every door. The daycare parents understood when I said we were switching to front door drop-offs only. I never wanted anyone walking through the side gate again. I still replay the whole thing in my head sometimes, especially when it gets quiet at night. I think about how calm he was, how believable. It makes you question your instincts. People always say, trust your gut. But what happens when your gut doesn't scream until it's too late? I didn't sleep for days after it happened. Every creak in the floor, every shadow on the wall, it all felt like them coming back. I got used to sleeping with the lights on, at least for a while. And sometimes I'll still catch myself double-checking if I locked the door, even when I know I did. What really messes me up is how normal they looked. No ski masks, no weapons, just two guys in work clothes pulling off something they'd probably done dozens of times. I wonder if they saw my face when I screamed. I wonder if they laughed about it afterward. Part of me wishes I'd done more, fought back, grabbed something. I don't know. But another part of me knows I did the only thing I could do. I ran. And maybe that's what saved me. They didn't get much, just a couple of earrings and some old cash in a drawer. But it could have been worse. It could have been so much worse. I never got a name, no one ever got caught, and nothing was ever recovered. But I know what I saw. I know what happened. And if you're reading this, I'm begging you, don't ever let someone into your house just because they look official. Call the company, check their ID, lock every door. Trusting people used to feel like the default. Now I double-check everything. Maybe that's just the world we live in. Or maybe it's what happens when you learn the hard way that not every knock on the door means help is coming.